Okay, very good. Good morning, everybody. On behalf of the Greater Scranton Chamber of Commerce, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. I'm Amy Leister, and our topic today is best practices to create a sustainable work-from-home workforce. This seminar is presented by Lesson Alive, Penn State Scranton, TMG Health, and Team Logic IT. And it's been a collaboration as a series of webinars that we've hosted with our regional partners, and the logos are attached on the slide today. At this point, I'm going to introduce our speakers. The event today, I will say, is being recorded. It will be placed on our chamber website at scrantonchamber.com. Important resources, and you can also search our #ReviveNEPA section of our website, and it will be posted after conclusion of the day, and the resources from today's event, including downloads, will be available on the website. So at this time, I'm going to talk to you about our speakers today. So we have Trish Savitsky, who is the Chief Compliance Officer at TMG Health Cognizant. She provides executive leadership, ongoing management for the company's compliance and audit services. Trish is an experienced healthcare leader with more than 25 years experience and previously served as TMG's Health Senior Vice President and Chief Services Officer. Trish holds a master's degree in human resources administration from the University of Scranton, a bachelor's degree in psychology from Bloomsburg University, and a certified information privacy professional and certified internal auditor. Trish also serves as a Scranton Chamber of Commerce board member and on our Healthcare Administration Program Advisory Board for King's College. We have Frank Sarachik of Penn State Scranton. His leadership and has experience in leadership and management with both practical and academic experience. He has more than 20 years of applied management experience in various disciplines and has been a lecturer at Penn State University since 2012. Frank has taught at both the Scranton campus and the World campus on topics that include economics, project management, business strategy, risk management, and marketing. Frank is specifically focused on the application of new concepts and systems to improve efficiency. This includes integration of not only technology, but of new management theory in both the workplace and the educational environment. Mike Williams is the owner and president of Team Logic IT of Northeastern Pennsylvania. He has more than 30 years of technology experience. Mike has directed global technology visions, strategies, and operations, including financial planning, analysis, IT, governance, compliance, security, and product development and delivery to clients across 3 continents. Mike has held positions of IT director, vice president, head of technology, and ultimately chief information officer in both the private and public sector. And lastly, we have Valerie Serra, who is our CEO and co-founder of Lesson Alive, which is a live expert lecture marketplace and a virtual event consultant. Valerie is a veteran of managing large remote teams to support global projects for a 20-plus year career, including roles at PricewaterhouseCoopers and as Vice President of Enterprise Project Office at TMG Health Cognizant. Valerie has a professional project management credential, a bachelor's degree in accounting from the University of Scranton, an MBA from California State University, and will complete her master's in education innovation instruction in 2020. At this time, I'm pleased to present to you our panelists, and I'm going to turn it over to Valerie.
Thank you, Amy. That is an impressive panel. Thanks everyone for joining us. It's great to have you all, very experienced group with us today. So thank you very much, and thanks to everyone else who's joined us today to hear about best practices to create a sustainable work from home workforce. So today we decided to approach this webinar with an experienced group who can really talk from very different perspectives on their experiences in helping to develop work from home workforces, you know, the aspects that you need to be successful, both from a technology and a resource management perspective, and hopefully give you some tools that you need, as well as an opportunity to ask questions at the end, as Amy had previously mentioned, so that you can leave here with the start of some great information and let you get moving on building your sustainable work from home workforce. So today we're going to address things like why You know, a lot of people moved very quickly because of crisis to developing a work from home workforce, but we're going to talk a little bit more about the long-term benefits. We are definitely going to address the importance of formal policies and procedures, technology, productivity. We'll talk about communication and resource management, and we will address probably throughout employee training needs, but we'll definitely take a minute and talk about those as well. Okay, so I'm going to jump right in here to some of the reasons that you should really think about creating this sustainable team of resources who can work from home beyond the crisis of what you've been in, which essentially has been a business continuity solution. And I was just going to share a story with you. I've personally been working from home in various ways since 1998. And I was a young associate working for PricewaterhouseCoopers and had gotten off a plane from a business trip much later than I anticipated and couldn't drive into the office, which was in downtown Los Angeles at the time. And so I had to plug my computer into my phone and through a dial-in all night long, 1 hour, because that's how long it took to transmit, send a giant Excel workbook. And I had to put my phone on, actually it wasn't my phone, I had to set an alarm because there was no smartphones, it was 1998, to remind myself every hour to send in a file. I had to wake myself up because the workbooks were so large. Today's work from home experience is nothing like that, but you know, the point of that was I needed that flexibility at that point, and it was my only option. And so sometimes it is the need that drives the work from home solution. And so you can think about that in a lot of ways. So besides the business continuity aspect, which isn't just right now, but is a sustainable plan you should be putting in place, you should think about employee attraction and retention. There are a million studies out there that suggest that employees, and particularly millennials, are looking for the ability to have flexible work schedules that includes work from home solutions. And so, you know, if nothing else, you might want to think about employee attraction and employee retention, flexibility, commuting time and cost, and childcare savings. The last one probably gets the most complicated because, you know, only under certain circumstances can somebody really have a great work from home experience and have their children nearby, but particularly with older children or in certain jobs, that works really well. Improved productivity. Now this one might raise a few eyebrows, but there are plenty of studies that a lot of industries have actually seen increased productivity when their employees work from home. And there are many employees who report that they actually work more productively and longer hours because they remove the commute from their schedule, for one, and they also remove some of the ancillary things that might take up their day, like the casual, you know, walk by water cooler types of things that happen in the office that could be distracting. It's environmentally friendly, so this, you know, actually has multiple aspects, which includes the commuting component. But we know many organizations are looking for ways to support environmentally friendly practices. Geographic diversity is a big one. I personally took, you know, a huge benefit in looking at a work from home workforce in my previous role because I needed to recruit, and the local talent pool had essentially been tapped out for the skills that I needed in a growing team. And so in order for me to look beyond the region for opening up our doors, I had to be able to offer some work from home flexibility because we were looking to attract resources from, you know, 100-mile radius essentially. And we ended up actually, you know, very quickly being able to fill positions by enabling those resources to primarily work from home with an agreement that they would travel into the office on a regular basis for needs of, you know, projects or staff meetings, etc. Geographic diversity is a great benefit for operational risk management. depending on the business area that you are in. Certainly, you can appreciate that, having resources in multiple locations, across, whether it's, across the country or even across the globe, does provide a lot of support for business continuity, or maybe even can support disaster recovery planning. For instance, if you have staff members that might be, geographically located in a different state and, a different, let's say, weather pattern, potentially, if you have a large group who might be located in one area and there's a weather event, for instance, right? And there's, internet goes down, electricity goes down. From an operational risk management perspective, that geographic diversity allows business to continue and some resources to keep working while others might be having some struggles. And then business reach, really for the same reason, right? So this can give you an opportunity. If you have employees in other geographic areas, it brings awareness of your business, to an expanded audience because of that geographic reach. And then finally, and probably most simply, is the concept of facility cost savings. So obviously, this provides a few things. One, if you had to expand quickly, having a work from home workforce that provides you with the flexibility without having to make a major investment. It also allows for interim types of solutions, right? So you might need to expand temporarily and you don't want to have to get into the investment of real estate. And then of course, from a long-term planning perspective, if you don't need all of the physical space because you have an opportunity to allow some employees to work from home, then obviously you'll reap the benefits long-term from planning from that perspective. So I'd just like to, take a minute and just see if any of the other panelists have, any other benefits that they wanted to add or any other perspective on these items before we move on.
Hey Val, it's Trish. I did just want to touch on the improved productivity. And, we were surprised as well how the productivity has remained stable or even improved during this COVID crisis. So many folks may know that TMG has had a long history of working from home. So our entire claims team worked from home for, over 20 years. So we always had that model, but it was not throughout the organization. And so over time, we've been looking at, how do we allow folks to work from home? And it was done 1 or 2 days a week. This crisis really was a disruption to the business. And so we moved even call center reps home, other activities to home. And, the first thing that we looked at was, is productivity going to be the same? We have to do this quickly. But we have found with thousands of employees that the productivity has either, as I said, remained steady or improved. So definitely we have seen that. And I agree with your other statements. A lot of it is work-life balance, being able to focus a little earlier in the day, you're not commuting. So definitely we have seen that for the work at home. And it's something we're looking to continue more formally after the crisis.
Valerie, if you don't mind, I just make a note that's not on the slide, but discussion point is actually customer service. In a lot of industries, you'll get after hours or after business activities take place where you get a phone call and you'll triage them and then say, we'll get back to you in the morning. Well, once your systems become accessible, you actually can resolve the issue when you have them on after hours. So from a customer service perspective, it gives you more flexibility and more reach. I know that can get into the, the work home life balance, but if you have somebody who's on call, they now can resolve the issue as opposed to just triaging it and pushing it off to the next day.
Thanks, Trish and Mike. That's awesome. That's very helpful. Okay, so I'm going to take a minute here and turn the conversation a little bit into one of, policies and procedures. And I know from, I did have the pleasure of working with Trish at TMG and actually helping to roll out some early programs for work from home mainly to enable business continuity and that geographic diversity topic. And so I know how important it is in large organizations, and particularly those that are regulated, to think about policies and procedures, and that's both to protect the data as well as to protect the human resource component, right? So Trish, I'd love to turn, the topic over to you, and just talk for a minute, or a couple of minutes about the importance of policies and procedures and what your experience has been in that regard.
Sure. Thanks, Val. So as Val mentioned, I worked with her at TMG, and we have rolled out many work-at-home policies. So the first thing you hear with policy and procedure, you think it's very formal, very cumbersome, but it does not need to be. Really what you want to do is establish a framework for your work at home. Even think of it as guidelines. So what we have done is we always have a formal policy procedure structure, but again, it may turn out to be guidelines, bullet points, etc., whatever your business needs. So the first step is really ensuring that you know your regulatory requirements for your business. So for example, TMG works in the healthcare industry, very regulated, but we also have financial information. So you need to look at your business and determine what are the regulatory guidelines, what do you need to be worried about as you push the work to home. You want to make sure that you understand your contracts with your clients or customers, or what their expectations are of you. In our case, we did have to go out to larger clients and actually request approval, to have their information in the homes of employees. So again, big or small business, there's going to be different requirements, but you really need to think about, what do your contracts or agreements with your customers have, and also what are their expectations. And if you're not sure, it's a good idea to really talk with the client and just be honest, about the need. With the COVID crisis, in many ways, clients didn't have an option. You had to work through the issue quickly. But in other circumstances, you want to talk to the clients and see what their thoughts are. We just talked about productivity, but you do need to think about, even though it might be nice to work at home, folks want to work at home, what are the productivity requirements? Can the associates or employees work from home? Is there going to be anything negative with the productivity? Is it going to negatively impact the customer? So again, think about those items. I think we're going to touch on more IT and security type items as this discussion goes on, but a very big thing you want to think about when pushing work to home is the data and ensuring that it's managed within security guidelines, privacy guidelines. So there are technical ways that you can do that to ensure that it's secure. But again, just very important, even before you speak with customers, to know what data do you have. And again, it doesn't have to be a big policy procedure written out, but a listing, a guideline, and then to determine what data will be pushed to home, or will people be accessing from home, and how are you going to secure that? One note too is to remember that accommodations for any type of disability, any requirements, those you want to ensure that you're still handling through your human resources area, or having those discussions. So, again, when you move to work from home, there may be some accommodations that are required. So again, regulation, looking at that, making sure you have that documented is very important. Another thing to keep in mind is participation requirements. So especially if you have a larger organization, can everyone work from home? What are your criteria for working from home? So it's a good idea to have some type of request process and have that documented. So where the employee asks to work at home, or you've set up a model that you're going to have employees work at home, make sure that you have that documented for each employee with the requirements. So do they need to have a quiet area? Does it need to be a locked room? You need to be careful of noise in the background, etc. So what are those expectations, and what allows the employee to participate in that? Again, consider, do employees have to be with you a certain period of time? They have to be working 3 months. They need to complete training. If they score a certain score on a test that you're giving or a quiz that you're doing, then they can move to work at home. So again, I think just really looking at participation guidelines, then ensuring that you have a request process. And then finally, it's important too to have a review process for those requests. So in my case, we have hundreds of employees who are requesting to work from home. You need to ensure that you're consistent in those reviews. What are you considering when someone makes that request? And how do you approve that? If you deny it, it's important as well to communicate why you're denying. What's your justification for not allowing that work at home? And then also, it's a good idea in a policy procedure format to have the employee agree. So have that outline of whatever your requirements are in an attestation or an agreement from the employee. So it's important as the employer that you lay out the expectation. It's important that the employee agrees to it and understands the requirements. And in most cases, that work at home can be revoked if the business needs change or if there's an issue with employee performance. So it will potentially tie into human resource issues, which is why it's important to outline this, the requirements, up front. Again, I kind of touched on this, but consider risk management guidelines. So, what are the employee precautions that they should take at home? Other family members in the household should not be sitting looking at the screen. They should not be using the work laptop for personal use unless the company permits that. If you're doing phone calls, especially with customers, a call center, you need to be in a room where other household members cannot hear the information. So again, what are your requirements, and what are the guidelines to eliminate that risk from working at home? It's important that employees report lost or stolen equipment. So that is always a real concern, happens more than you would think, especially if transporting equipment somewhere. So again, just basic risk management guidelines. If you're carrying a laptop with you, lock it in the trunk of the car. Don't leave it exposed. Make sure that you report it if it does get stolen, or if you do leave your work-issued phone or laptop somewhere and it is lost. So again, putting those guidelines, procedures in place. Also, it's important to have a procedure in place if there is a compliance failure. So for example, if someone overhears information or looked or took information from your equipment, or if you had paperwork. So again, just really putting those guidelines in to minimize that risk. Also, it's something to consider. We used to do this more, but I know, as Val mentioned, some work at home has been going on for years. Others is very new. We used to have an audit process in place where certain positions, such as a call center phone rep, we could go into the home and inspect the environment. With the recent changes, with everyone pushing to work at home and with improvements in security, that may not be required. In the past, there was a lot more room for error or room for information to be lost or looked at. But that's something, again, to consider in putting in your requirements for work at home. Are you going to want to inspect the location either in person or via camera? We've heard of some clients who will ask employees to activate their camera at a certain point in time and pan around the room and look at, are you in a closed location? Is there noise, etc. And then the final thought I would leave for policies and procedures is just, are there any disciplinary guidelines? So again, if someone's a call rep and you hear a dog barking in the background, constantly it's interrupting calls, what are your actions going to be? What are the steps you're going to take? And I just think it's important for both the employees and the company to be very clear on that. So those are really the suggestions I would make. And, if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them at the end. I believe we're holding questions, but I'll turn it back to you, Val.
Trish, thank you so much for that thorough rundown. I think it's great perspective depending, on what business and industry you're in, on the, size of the organization. Some of those items are highly applicable. And then, just the overall guidance of the importance of just, assessing all of your needs is just critical. So thank you so much for that. Frank or Mike, before we, transition the conversation over into more of the technical requirements, does anyone have any other comments on that? I know, Mike, you're going to kind of touch on a lot of that security, coming up. Okay, Frank, anything before we transition to IT? Okay, awesome. Well, then I'm going to transition the conversation over and hand it to Mike, because he's going to do a deep dive for us into the IT requirements and the security components that we just spoke a little bit about.
All right. Okay, good morning, everyone. So first note, before we actually start anything, there's going to be slides here that have details in them. The two worksheets that are shown on the screen, the remote workforce checklist, as well as balancing productivity and security, they're both available through the chamber. I thank them for that. So you can, virtually everything I speak to is documented, and you can actually use the checklists for reviewing your own businesses. So I'll just put that out there up front. The interesting thing in the technology space is it puts a new hat on most folks in the small and medium-sized business space. Specifically, it asks you to be a business analyst. What do you do? Why do you do it? And how does the IT impact that? It asks you to be a risk manager. Once I start thinking about IT, how do I ensure that it's used in a way that both supports my business successfully, doesn't become a large liability to my business, and additionally is always what I'll just say is available. And then the third requires you to be an educator. More than 60% of all ransomware attacks start as phishing expeditions, email. So you'll have to spend time training your staff on the idea that because you're at home and it feels safer doesn't mean it necessarily is from a technology perspective. And then lastly, as the other two panelists, I also spent a lot of time teaching college, so can't help the teacher in me. So I'm going to give you a little equation to think about. Every business has to decide about security, about policy and procedures, about risk. So this equation is kind of a proprietary one, but think about R as risk minus whatever mitigation plans you put in place, times whatever compliance requirements are put on you by the government, HIPAA, FERPA, PCI, whatever it may be, and that equals your risk tolerance. And the exponent represents how much you're willing to invest to actually resolve this issue. So it doesn't apply to technology, it applies to any business. You have to think about it in terms of what resources you're going to invest in, and it's not the same for everybody. One lawyer practice can spend a lot less than a 30 lawyer practice, but they have the exact same security requirements. So it doesn't really change in that sense. Next slide, please. So here's what I'd like you to think about from a technology perspective. Forget whether it's remote or at work. The reality is your staff expects three things. They expect their technology to be available, they expect it to be reliable and working, and they expect it to be secure, no matter where it is, airport, their home office, the office, it doesn't matter. Those are the three things that everybody expects. So that's one side. The second thing is you have to think about security versus productivity. Trish talked about this a little bit. Add a third item. If you're using BYOD, bring your own device, it's security versus productivity versus privacy, because individuals who use their own products have an expectation of privacy, where they use a company provided product, they have no expectation of privacy. And those are all established by policy. So I just make that note to you, there's that third arm that always comes in when you work from home. And then of course, as I said before, everything talks about that equation, because that equation is really about investment. What are you willing to invest to ensure that your work from home practices actually will work? Okay. Next slide, please. So here's the detail. I'm not going to read all this to you. I'm just going to make a note to you. I think about technology in three realms again, from a readiness perspective. Can you actually use it to work from home? From a policy perspective that Trish talked about, and then from a security perspective, how do we ensure that what we do at home is equally secure as what we do at work? And so those are the three tranches. The handout, the data sheet that we'll provide actually breaks it into these 3 parts: readiness, policies, and security. So real simple. Before you start a home workforce policy, you have to establish what hardware you need, whether it's, again, whether it's going to be BYOD, they're using their own computers, or you're providing them these things. So give thought to them. All the computer sides, people often forget the telephone side. So you do have that voice side of communication as well to keep in mind. And then think about in the sense of when I send hardware home, it's not, send it and forget it. Now, how am I going to manage it once it gets there? Okay. The second item, and this is a biggie for everybody. I know for folks who came home as part of this pandemic, it's been difficult to measure this, but you're not measuring your internet bandwidth by what you use. You're measuring it by what your household uses. If you have, I have a college-age student home doing online courses. I have a senior in high school or junior high school doing online courses, and he also likes his, his PS2 PlayStation on the web. So you have to think about how you manage that bandwidth. And so picking a number, the amount you need, is really hard to do unless you think about all the factors that impact that. You got the Alexa going, they call it IoT, Internet of Things, your smart TV, all those things take up your bandwidth. The next one's a little complicated, folks. You keep hearing all the time about this VPN. I need VPN to things. Well, a virtual private network is to your resources at your office. But if you're a small business and all of your resources are in the cloud, then VPN doesn't do anything for you because you don't have anything in your office to VPN into. You actually just need to be able to reach up into the cloud. This adds a different set of security issues, and that is that everybody on your home network, that internet provider provides you a gateway to the internet, but everybody there is now on the same network. So your children are a liability, your family are a liability, and anybody who accesses that network, friends come over with their smartphone, they're now on your network and they're a liability. So you have to think about the right type of security in your network. We've spent a lot of time putting firewalls in home offices because they realized they need to have the same security. To Trish's comments, if you're signing on your cyber liability insurance that you have firewalls in place in your place of business and your home offices are places of business, they need firewalls. So you run into some different compliance decisions to make. And then the one I put in red's real important. Most of your businesses are about information management. If you're a law firm or your doctor's office or whatever you may be, you need access to your information. So if your stuff is on papers and you're in your office, it stops your workflow. So you have to think about, how do I make sure my information is available, accessible, and secure? So give thoughts to how you're managing your information and where it lives, because the reality is once you get home, you may be able to service your customers for a small period of time, but as soon as you access the information that's sitting someplace else, that will cause you bottlenecks for you'll be running back and forth to your office, what will actually happen if you can't resolve this one. So, and the last two, as I said at the beginning in yellow, we forget about the whole voice side of things. So VoIP phones, the great thing about them is you actually can unplug them in your office, take them home, plug them in, and they work with a couple configurations. But most folks don't have that to take home for every employee. But give thought to it because voice is important. And then as we're doing now, video conferencing, Zoom works very well. Microsoft Teams, for those who are using Office 365, works very well. Google Hangouts, there's a lot of options. Pick the one that best suits the culture of your company. Okay, Val, next. So policies, Trish hit on these really well. I'm just gonna make this note again. BYOD, bring your own device. That means an iOS device like a phone, a computer, etc. I don't know if we have any lawyers on the phone, but we know that if you ever get in an issue where it goes into what we call discovery, any device is discoverable if it's used for work. So as we think about our devices, that's important whether you want to provide company-owned resources, which means it's all business, or allow them to use personal-owned machines, understanding that in a litigation decisions, it could be that their personal machines are discoverable. All right, Trish talked about this. Whatever your policies are, you have to make sure they're clear, they're up to date, and they have to be enforceable. If your policies in place that aren't enforceable, they're not worth the paper they're written on. So give thought to what that looks like, whether it be acceptable use or data breach, password protection. If you're required to have complex passwords, regardless of the device, you need to make sure that your workforce understands that and agrees to that in writing through an acceptable use type policy. And I just put this COVID-19 fraud and scam note up here. There's a lot of data on the security slide that's going to give you stats, and you can look at all of them. But basically, you can think of it between 600 and 1,000% increase in fraud going after COVID-type advertising. So it's very important when we talk about training. It's around awareness, and that's critical. So there's our policies, and then our last slide from a technical perspective is around security. Give thought to things like multi-factor authentication. That means when you log on with a password, you're going to be prompted to a cell phone or some other device to ensure that you're the only one who's accessing those systems. And that's for any ERP system, your QuickBooks, your practice management systems, your email. If you're using Office 365 email, all those things you should think about multi-factor or dual-factor authentication. VPN, we talked about earlier. If you're connected to a server, VPN is a tunnel, a private tunnel that lets you communicate with your data in your office. So that's necessary. When we talk about patches and updates and antivirus and anti-malware, if you're allowing someone to VPN into your network with their private computer, you have to make sure in their policy they agree that they'll maintain current patching on their personal computer, they'll maintain current antivirus on their computer. You establish what your standards are for anybody who connects themselves to your business network. And then I'm going to jump, again, I can't say it enough, that one in red, this awareness training. You can look at the stats, web pages, 2,300 different web pages that were fraudulent that came out in the first 2 months of the COVID pandemic. 667% spike in email attacks. This is just ongoing, and that's what the bad guys do. They look for anything that's of interest to folks, and then they find a way to get close to them, to get them to let their awareness down, let their protections down, so that you make the mistake of clicking on something and then they now have access to your systems. The data is pretty clear. Just give thought to, and I can't say enough, training and awareness. And next, Val. And so as I kind of wrap up the thoughts, like I said, I went over this very quickly. I intentionally gave it to you in writing. Like I said, you have the checklist. All those items are on it. You can go through it line by line. I also offer to anyone in the community, if you want to call us, we're happy to help just walk you through anything that you have questions about. It's out of our commitment to the community. So just think in these terms. When I look at my workforce from a home perspective, it's available, it's reliable, it's secure. We evaluate and weigh security versus productivity. If it's so secure that you can't get your work done, that's equally as bad as being unsecure that you're productive, because you'll be productive for a little bit until something happens. Then of course everything stops dead if you get a breach. So that's a problem. And as I said, as you make your decisions, it's risk minus whatever mitigation you can put into place based upon the economics of your business. Keep compliance in mind, HIPAA, FERPA, PCI, DS for banking. They go on NIST 700-171. There's a lot of compliance sides. They don't go away because your workforce is at home. So I just shared that with you. So I think that should be the last slide. Any questions for me? I appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike. I think we could probably do an entire webinar on this topic. So I appreciate you trying to, cram a lot of information in here so that we can touch on the important topics. And I think, you covered a lot. So thank you so much for that. We're going to transition the conversation to productivity, actually. So it's a great lead in here. And I'm going to transition over to Frank, who's going to talk a little bit more about the productivity of the home worker and give us some great tips in that space. So Frank, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Valerie. So one of the biggest problems as we move to a work from home environment is, what do I do, right? We've got all sorts of infrastructure in place for the people that work for us. We've got policies and procedures on what they should and shouldn't do. We've got the technology that's available to them, which we've covered. So I'm working from home. What now? What does my day look like? And the problem is this: when we're in the workforce, when we're at work, we have to adhere to a series of standards that exist that don't really exist. So when we're at home, those standards are absent and the boundaries are invisible. And so what we've got to do is make sure that our employees, and this is where employers have to really think about creating this support system for their employees. What things do our employees need to be effective? So I come home, I'm working from home, I don't feel so good today. Maybe I'll take it easy. I'm going to turn on Netflix. I'll feel a little better afterwards. Then I'll be productive, right? So now the day has become disrupted. So what do we have to do to help our employees? And this is something that I've been doing for about 20 years. I work with people, work with organizations on how to make their people more effective. So there's no infrastructure. People are working from home. We have to provide some sort of safety net. And there's a lot of literature over the last about 10 years or so on the effectiveness of habits. So one of the things that you can do for your employees in terms of helping them is to help them think about what habits that they need to cultivate to be effective when working from home. What's really interesting is you would think that an 18 or a 20-year-old student who's going to college and now doesn't have to go to class, who's sitting at home in bed, would feel great about having to jump onto a Zoom session to attend class. What I've found at Penn State is our students don't like that. They actually like the infrastructure. And that's going to be true of your employees as well. Someone who's a professional likes a little bit of structure to their day to make sure that they're really feeling effective. The problem is this: we start to feel ineffective and then we become ineffective, and that's driven by habits. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we give people support in this area to make sure that that they have the resources that they need. And it's not just as simple as, well, track your time, because tracking time doesn't necessarily make me feel effective. It's not necessarily as simple as, well, just make sure your calendar is completed. We need to have more of a holistic approach as we're helping our employees be more effective. So in helping employees understand this, there are some things that you can do. There are some books that you can take away from this. There will be a download available with some of that information. And some of this is just simple time management. And time management hasn't changed a lot in the last 30 to 40 years. Some of those things are very, very basic and still as effective today as they've always been. So in cultivating those habits, what are the things that we need to think about? Well, first of all, it's important to be very clear with our employees that you're going to have distractions. The dog is going to be barking in the background. You will hear the kids over here to your right as you're trying to present something on Zoom. Things are going to happen, and it's important not to allow those distractions to become permanently a problem, right? Don't let those things disrail what you're trying to do, right? And one bad set of circumstances doesn't necessarily have to become bad circumstances all the time. So how do we overcome those things? And it's also important to remind our employees that the mind is easily distracted, right? So as I'm sitting here trying to work, I start thinking about, I was binge watching last night and I left in the middle of that episode. I'd really like to watch that. Well, are there some things that I can do to help myself get back on track from those things? And then remember that the home is a place of downtime and relaxation. And this has been the biggest problem in the conversion to a work from home environment in COVID-19. So I'm at a place that psychologically is supposed to be an escape, and now it's not an escape. So how do we help employees deal with the fact that this really needs to be two environments in one? And there are some tips and tricks that I'll give you before we finish. But a couple more things to be familiar with. There are biological factors, and this is something in time management that's relatively new. So I talk about this a lot when I'm consulting with companies, but people really are not aware of this. So there are biological factors that affect how we feel. There are times of the day where we are more productive and times of the day where we're less productive. Valerie mentioned in opening earlier the fact that, well, if we don't have a commute, now that time can be used for more effective things that we can do. And that becomes very valuable early in the day, because for the average adult, their most effective time is in the morning. And that's a biological result. That's not due to just, I think it works that way. There are biological factors that result in that. The brain consumes about 20% of the energy that our body utilizes. And there are mixed results in studies, but some studies are indicating that the more complex the task that I have to do, the more energy that the brain is consuming. So if you've ever done something and you get to the end of it and you feel like, I don't know what to do now, I'm wiped out, that's because your brain is consuming more energy. And so these are important things to make people aware of as they're working from home. Oh, I just got done with a project It's 11 a.m. I'm feeling tired. I feel like a nap now. In the office, you wouldn't feel like that. So what's the difference at home versus in the office? And what are some things that we can do to help people cope with those situations where they might be negatively affected in the house? So we've got to be continually working on our habits. That's the key takeaway, because our habits will very quickly, bad habits will very quickly set in. Typically in about 2 to 3 weeks, people start establishing the habits of what they're going to do in working from home. And then once those habits become established, it's very difficult to peel those habits back out. So we want to think about those habits. So there's things that you can do that'll help you be more effective. There's things that you can give to your folks, to your employees, to make them more effective. And what I would do is this: I would talk to your people about creating demarcation. So demarcation is a dividing line. What they need is demarcation in their day. So they're working from home. Home is normally an environment where they're supposed to be at ease and at peace. And now they're a little bit torqued up because they have to get things done. Normally for people, that happens in their commute. So I'm driving to work, I'm getting kind of ready. I know that I've had this routine on a daily basis. And when I arrive in the parking lot, I'm kind of plugged in and ready to go. That doesn't exist at home. So are there things that we can do to create that demarcation? Well, there absolutely are things that we can do to help our people with that. One of the things that I read, which I thought was a pretty cool little hack that people could do, that will change their mindset, right? So we want to change the mindset, the demarcation. I'm not at home, I'm at work, even though I'm at home. Put a pair of shoes on, right? So if you are someone who doesn't wear shoes at home, just putting shoes on, changing the shoes you wear will psychologically make a difference. I know it seems absurd. It absolutely will make a difference. The clothing that you wear, a collared shirt versus a t-shirt, will make a difference in the way that you feel, right? So those are some simple things that you could do to help your people dress differently while you're on the clock. I know that sounds absurd, but these are psychological factors that people are dealing with. Next, simply leaving your house. So as simple as walking out the door and walking back in the door. It sounds silly, I know, but these are psychological things that people could do. Some people in different things that have been published are actually getting in their car, driving around the block and walking in the house to start their day, getting in their car, driving around the block to end the day, or going out and taking a walk, right? So these are very simple things that you can do. What you're doing is you're walking through the threshold and back through the threshold to begin and end the day. So that's the demarcation that you're creating, a definitive beginning and a definitive end, because otherwise the day is blending into one and it's adding to the stress level that people have. So there's other things that maybe are more particular to some people. Things like meditating are some things that people are doing to ease into their day and ease out of the day. So it's really whatever works for you, but try some different things through the course of your work from home experience and work with your people. If you find that someone's really getting stressed, try to create that psychological demarcation for them. And then there are productivity tools. And so productivity tools are really important for being effective. And when I do consulting with people, I find that people are still very averse to creating to-do lists. Some people say, I don't want to create a to-do list because it's going to make me feel stressed. So what happens is this: if you're not capturing the things that are coming into you on a regular basis, and if you don't have the benefit of working in an environment where this is captured for you. So in a lot of scenarios, the technology is already there to do it. But if you're in a situation where you don't have that infrastructure, just creating a to-do list of what you need to do is going to make you much more effective as a person. So being able to see what I have to do and then work toward that. And then a lot of people create one to-do list and they're done. Well, what you want to do is revise that on a regular basis. Psychologically, moving that from one list to another for the 18th time makes me say, maybe this is something I need to get done, right? So what we're trying to do is keep things in front of people so that they're aware that these are things that they must be working on. The next item on the right column there, developing an ideal weekly schedule, what's called a weekly matrix. What a weekly matrix does is this: I put down on paper what my week should look like. So you can take a simple Excel spreadsheet. Across the top, you can list the days, and along the first column, you can list the hours of the day, or you can get as granular as every 15 minutes. Plot out where all of your time should be spent. This is another thing that when I'm working on personal productivity exercises, people push back on, and they say, well, Frank, I can't tell you what I do for this hour of time. plan everything out. And if it's general concepts, that's just as well. If you're working on sales calls from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m., just put sales calls. You don't have to put who you're calling, but have a general schedule of what your week looks like, a matrix, so that you know what you're supposed to be doing at certain times. What will happen is your mind will snap into play when it's time to do a certain task by looking at it and saying, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing at 2 p.m. Another thing that's really important is, what are your time wasters? So for most people, it's become social media or some form of Netflix, some form of watching something on television, right? So if you find that you are highly drawn to look at your phone to see what's going on Facebook, you have to recognize that as a time waster and then get rid of the phone so that it's not near you, so that you're not drawn into looking at that. So write down on a piece of paper your top 10 time wasters and then work on eliminating those things. We're all human, we all make mistakes, and you're going to be drawn to those things again. But being aware of those things, if you have 8 or 10 time wasters and you could cut 4 of those out, you could be more effective throughout the course of the day. So those are some things that you could do to help yourself be better. There's a couple of other little tips and tricks that are out there, like gamification. There's a great concept in the download that I've made available called 10 before 10. Create a to-do list. So this is where you're putting things together. Create a to-do list, and in your to-do list, you have to get 10 things done before 10 a.m. Think about how effective that is if you could get 10 of those done. And here's what's great. If you fail and you only get 7 done, you still got 7 things done. You still feel better through the course of the day. So a couple of things that you're seeing on the screen right now. On the right is the weekly task matrix. That's just a sample that I downloaded from somewhere. It's as easy as just the days across the top, the times across the first column or down the first column, and then identifying what you're supposed to be doing at those times. Not a perfect science, but it's going to help you plug back into what you need to be doing at that time. On the left is something called the Tyranny of the Urgent. And what I would recommend is to look this up. It's either called the Eisenhower Matrix after President Eisenhower, or the Tyranny of the Urgent. They are the same concept, basically. Don't confuse things that are urgent with things that are important. This is what people tend to do from a time management standpoint. They think that the thing that feels like it has to be done is the thing that has to be done. That may be true, and it may not be true. So those are things that you could research on your own, and again, they'll be available via the download. Valerie, back to you.
Frank, thank you so much. I know we're starting to get a little bit tight on time. I appreciate how much information you provided, so thanks for the great tips. And as Frank said, and Mike also said, I want to remind everyone that the Chamber is making their materials available along with the recording of this webinar, so everyone will have an opportunity to grab those downloads and leverage them in your businesses and for your employees. So thank you for that. We did have a couple last topics and then a couple of questions that are starting to come in. So while we jump topics here really quickly, I just want to encourage everyone, you can go ahead and use the chat function. It's at the bottom of the screen. If anyone does have a question they want to send in, we'll take the last couple minutes here and answer questions. But before we do that, I do want to talk a little bit about communication tools. We spoke a lot about, different types of tools in general, and IT solutions and policies and procedures. All of those lend themselves in many different ways. I know in my experience, for me, my top communication tools have been one, a teleconferencing system like Zoom, so that you can have in-person sessions with people and you can still have a physical contact and a little bit of a better communication when you can actually see, right? There's plenty of studies that say, that physical presence is helpful. So you're not always just talking to the work from home employee on the phone, but you can see each other and see each other's workspace. And then the other communication tool that's been great for me always has been, some type of chat function, right? Where you can do direct messages really quickly with someone, real instantaneous. So, using something like Microsoft's chat function or Slack, or even if you're not in really a regulated industry or you have privacy concerns, even something like Facebook Messenger can work, right? Just any last tips on communication that anybody wants to give in terms of, their, maybe one best tip if you have something you'd like to share. And then also as it relates or doesn't relate to training, does this create any training issues with employees? How you transition, how you work, how you, transition, how you communicate. So any last thoughts on those two topics to the panelists?
In terms of transitioning, I think we assume a lot of things, right? So as managers or business owners, we know what we want, and we assume that our employees want the same thing. And it's not necessarily that they don't, it's that maybe they don't have the same infrastructure or background. So assume nothing and assume that everything needs a policy, a procedure, and training.
And Val, my thoughts, I think during a situation like COVID, but even when folks are working at home under normal circumstances, they always want to hear from you. So I don't think it's ever too much communication. Sometimes you think, oh, we'll do that in 2 weeks or whatever. I'm finding employees like to hear from you more frequently than not. So I don't think you can overstate the communication. And as you mentioned, Zoom, or we use WebEx formally for work, that really goes a long way to see each other, especially when you're in lockdown like we are today. So definitely think you can't communicate too much when folks are working at home.
And Bill, I just make one note, especially like in what we're doing right now. We've turned a lot of systems on for employees to use. We actually haven't modeled how to use them. So people get into these environments, and things that they would do in their office, they kind of lose track how many people on the phone, who's out there, et cetera. And they lose track of I'll just call it the environment. So I suggest that when you first set up your work from home spaces, you have staff meetings, you model the expectations of how you're set up, et cetera. You actually can look at everybody's kind of set up and make some suggestions. I've seen folks with French doors behind them and see bodies walking by, et cetera. So you just have to help them with their office healthy habits in building that culture. And as I think Frank said, don't assume anything. So I think modeling how you expect the virtual communication to take place.
Yeah, I mean, just like, Trish said, you can't over communicate, you can't overtrain either, right? Ever. So I think, don't underestimate, the need to train employees sometimes on simple things related to, how to get online and how to use these tools that you might think are commonplace at this point aren't necessarily commonplace for everyone. So, all right, well, we had only one question come in, and I'm actually going to start this question by taking it over to Trish, if I could, Trish. And the question actually came through your original points. And the question was, what about morale issues among employees who must be on premise versus those who can telework? So you're granting some the permission to work from home while others are not getting that permission. Any advice there on how you handle that morale?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, again, I did mention in part of the presentation, is really that justification for why the person cannot work from home, and really communicating that. So we do have that instance where we have a handful of folks in a mailroom that need to go into the office where 95% of the rest of the employees are at home during this. So I think, number one, just being very clear. And that's why it's important when you do allow work at home that you need to have criteria, job requirements, regulatory requirements, and explaining to that individual or group of individuals why they need to be in the office versus working at home. So again, that justification I think is very, very important. For morale, there's always things you could do within the office. So it kind of goes back to other HR policies where you could give them pizza, other things, excuse me, on site that the folks at home don't have. But I think it really goes back to that communication and being clear on why you need to be in the office versus other employees at home. And then always seeing if you could rotate. So what we've done is, even for a mailroom, we've allowed folks maybe 1 day at home or half a day at home. Again, it's not the same, but it's helpful to try and improve that morale.
Thank you, Trish. I see Amy jumping on. We had a couple other questions come in. Do we have a few more minutes, Amy, or do we need to turn it over and close?
So why don't we, if the panelists have time, why don't we answer those questions and those that need to jump off, and I'll just give some closing remarks. Thank you everyone for attending today. Please view our website at scrantonchamber.com, our events page, and we will have additional webinars coming up. So please keep keep those in mind. And thank you for attending.
Thanks, Amy. So if anyone can stay on, the panelists, are you able to stay for 5 more minutes if like 3 or 4 more questions came in?
Sure.
Yes.
That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So if everyone can, whoever can stay, please stay. We'll answer these last few questions. So there's a question here about tracking employees working from home, wants to institute a possible work from home a couple of days a week, advice on systems that track employees. And I assume this means like monitoring activities. So, you know, depending on your industry, those that rely on productivity, maybe things like call center or enrollment operations, or Trish, to your point earlier, the claims processes, you're relying on productivity, right? And so you need to do some type of monitoring. I know for myself, I had a really simple policy in place that was when you're working, your chat is on and available. So we had working hours because of the types of role that we had to basically keep office hours, right? We didn't have flexible office hours. So when you're working and you're scheduled to work, you were always available on the chat. So even though you might not receive a chat, it showed that you were available for somebody if they needed you, right? Because of the role we had. So you can monitor them by making sure they were always available very simply on your screen. That was easy, but that was the type of role we had. I know, Trish, in your environment, you've had to install software of various kinds to do some types of monitoring. And I think that's common in call centers and things that rely on employee productivity. So anything from the panel there, anything else you want to add besides those comments?
I would note there are a few different types. To the call center side, obviously, you can monitor via their phone agents. There are certain things like you were talking about that say that you're quote unquote on the queue. There are other, I'm not a big fan of them, but there are other productivity, they'll call them productivity managing software, but really what they are is, in a sense, they're spyware. You're able to actually see the websites they've been to. You can see actually do key logging, know exactly what they're typing in the computer. There are all those types of things. I would leave that to the legal folks in the room, but I have a pretty strong feeling about that if you build the right culture, your employees shouldn't feel like you need to, if it's performance-based, it's execution-based, and it's not, we need to nanny state you. That's just an issue you have to weigh out for your individual company's culture.
Thanks,
All right,
Mike.
I think there are some good tools that are not expensive. I think one of the concerns that businesses might have, especially a really small business that wants to allow someone to work from home, a lot of the things we've talked about are quote unquote higher end, right? So these are for call centers for larger organizations. But there's a lot of great tools that are out there that are either free or inexpensive that you can use to monitor activity, right? So we're not talking about actually going into their machine and looking at what they're doing, but managing tasks. There's software, there are solutions one is called ClickUp, which is a task list, right? So you can create a shared task list amongst various people. Trello is a great example of a project management software. Both of those are available for free. If you have the Microsoft Office suite, there's tremendous number of capabilities built into the Office suite today that people can use. So there's a lot of tools out there that don't cost anything. And if you're looking to, let's say, monitor phone activity, if you issue a company issued cell phone, you can track the time very easily by logging into Verizon and seeing how often that person's on the phone, right? So all these things don't have to cost a lot of money. There are very, very free very, very inexpensive or free things that people can do to track that activity. Great,
thank you. All right, then one last question before we close. And the question was around, actually, they have and many are in this case, and I know it's applicable to me, where you're not just working from home, but you're working remotely. And that often might mean you're at a client site, or, if you're traveling around, in some cases you have employees who might need to pull into a Starbucks, right, and work there because they're on the road. So certainly that's where, a lot of Trish's pointers on policies and procedures and making sure that's, well documented, and Mike's conversations around security, all of that still needs to apply. But does anyone have any last, advice for that scenario? Is there anything different they need to think about when their employees are not just working from home, but now they're actually, remote in general?
from a pure security perspective, if you have like sales folks, et cetera, or just folks who have, you know, their phones with them, I certainly recommend them turning on their mobile hotspot and using their network with their passwords turned on and their credentials turned on than joining a public network. You know, it's just a reality that you can control your data. As soon as you join somebody else's network, you're at their mercy. So that's just a general rule of thumb that works specifically, I'll say it over again, specifically at airports. If you've got a data service to your phone, use your personal Wi-Fi. Don't use the free stuff.
And Val, I was going to say, you know, similar, Mike, the security is important. So if your security is done well and you follow the tips and suggestions, it should not matter where you're working. You know, your home may be a little more secure, but, you know, again, it's Starbucks. Don't let someone stand behind you. You know, as Mike just said, use your own hotspot. You know, don't leave papers laying around. So the same types of things would apply. So I think if you have this program or these guidelines and that framework set up, it should keep your information secure and also give the employee the flexibility to be where they need to be to get that job done.
Thanks. All right, so I think we're going to wrap this up. I want to thank the panelists. You did an awesome job. There's chat coming in from many who are thanking you all for your great insight and support. So I just wanted to say that. And Amy, I'll turn it over to you. Any last words before we close?
Yep. Again, on behalf of the Greater Scranton Chamber of Commerce, thanks to the panelists and everyone for attending today. Please check the website for the recording of this event and the downloads and for additional events coming up. And if you have any suggestions for other webinars you'd like us to bring, just email us at editor@scrantonchamber.com. So have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good day.